The Canadian government has chosen its preferred bidder for who will bid its fleet of new submarines. The decision comes after an intense competition between Germany and Norway on one side and South Korea on the other, with both bids promising major economic benefits to the Canadian economy. While both said they would build submarine maintenance facilities on two of Canada's coasts, there were some other big commitments in those pitches. The winning bid from Germany and Norway boasts an $86 billion boost to Canada's GDP over the life of the deal, up to 50,000 jobs created in Canada over the next 5 years. A proposal to build a factory to make heavy torpedoes and possibly develop hypersonic missiles. The German government has also shown interest in major investments in Manitoba's Port of Churchill to help get critical minerals and LNG to market, and said it wants to partner with Alberta to establish a carbon capture facility. Now, this is the pitch the federal government has chosen, but let's take a look at what it passed on. The South Korean bid promised more than $70 billion in trade and investment in Canada, with all of its investment creating between 15,000 and 22,500 jobs per year, all the way through to 2044. There was a memorandum of understanding with Ontario's Algoma Steel, committing up to $345 million to build a steel beam mill and to purchase Algoma's steel to build and maintain the submarines. And finally, a deal with Canada's Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, promising to build armored vehicles in Canada. Both of those plans were contingent on South Korea winning the contract. Well, here to talk about these bids and the politics around this decision, we've got the Power Panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Carleen Verheyen is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers. Zane Velji is a former strategist for the Alberta NDP. And here with me in the studio on a Monday, not a Friday, we've got Fred Delory. He is a former Conservative campaign manager. It's good to see you all. Fred, there's a lot of money and a lot of jobs on the table from the competing bids here. This is a fast decision in military procurement terms. What do you make of the argument the Prime Minister laid out today in picking the German-Norwegian bid here?
Yeah, look, I think it is great to see Canada actually taking defense seriously and actually putting money behind it and getting things moving and not sitting on it for years and years and years and years like we've seen in the past. And in fact, it sounds like we're getting some subs within the next couple of years.
2034 is what it looks like, yeah.
Moving at a very fast pace. We still don't have F-35s, and it's been decades and decades of that going on. So this is obviously a very good thing for Canada, both the way they were able to get a foreign country to have so much of it built in Canada as well. TKMS doing that, and obviously not the country doing it, but the company. It's very hard to criticize anything here. This is good for Canada that we have this done.
Right. So, Carleen, I guess the question now becomes the execution of it all, the closing of the commercial and economic arrangements by the end of 2027. And if you're into long-term betting pools, what will we have first? All of our fighter jets or all of our subs? But, that's a 25-year payoff, maybe. Carleen, what are your thoughts on what we heard today from the Prime Minister?
Well, I'd put my money on the subs coming before the fighter jets. I think at the rate things are going, but Fred's right. This is a good day for Canada. And just to disclose on my end, my firm does some work with a lot of companies that were involved in this bid. But what I've observed as an outsider, I think, is the PM clearly working to ensure that his non-U.S. NATO allies are on side here, and that, coming through the deal with TKMS, a German company. He's headed to Turkey for the NATO summit, I believe today or tomorrow, where the Secretary General has told all of the NATO members they're expected to show up with a plan for meeting their defense spending benchmarks, and he can show up with this brand new, lovely agreement to backstop the building of a modern submarine fleet. So I think the next sort of moment, like where the rubber's going to hit the road here, is execution. Great, we've signed the deal, or we'll have a final deal signed by the end of 2027. I think that workforce requirements, training requirements, building the platform, those things have generational impacts, and they won't all be figured out this week or even this year. So there'll be plenty of milestones along the way that the government's going to have to work really hard to hit and hit competently in order for this to work.
Zane, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, there seems to be an element of future-proofing here, and then the Prime Minister pointed out that like 1/3 of NATO members buy these subs, so you're in a parts ecosystem, a crewing ecosystem, training ecosystem that you wouldn't be if you went with the different option, though he said both options met their technical requirements. What were your thoughts on the choice?
No, I mean, listen, so in some ways, you're going to have to buy into a platform, just like, let's just use a consumer perspective. You buy into an ecosystem of Apple or Google, and you're kind of stuck. Even if you're not stuck, you're kind of stuck. And, it's kind of comical because we're sitting here being like, those subs will come so soon in 8 years. But in this world, though, you are locking yourself into a generational ecosystem. So there is that level of quote unquote risk. But I think the most interesting thing to me about this was that A, the government made a choice, B, the government made a choice quickly, and C, the process now telegraphs to frankly, the Western world that Canada does business at this pace, that Canada makes choices at this pace. And yes, they may not be as large or generational in terms of size of investment, in terms of sub and industrial policy, but just like the pipelines that we're going to talk about, this is very much a message to the rest of the world about the Carney government and their ability to make deals and make decisions quickly. And to me, that might be just as, if not more important than the outcome and the long-term impacts of us locking into this deal for 30 plus, 40 plus years in this ecosystem.
Emily, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it is definitely sending a signal that they moved this quickly on a defense procurement issue. It is also going to drive home the warning the Prime Minister gave when he committed to the NATO target that at a certain point, we've got to have a big conversation about what the federal government can do and can't do, because so much of what it's spending on is going to go to military and security spending.
Yeah. It's also, I think, a great example of the sort of pace of announcement that we're having to get used to from the Carney government. I remember, for example, just before the G7 was hosted in France, there was a series of measures and announcement on AI when Parliament was still sitting. That was just the mentality seems to be get things done so that when I get to France and sit down with Macron, I have something to talk about that I knew he wanted. And so it's the same thing with NATO. If he's about to get on a plane, I think as journalists, we need to get ready to be able to anticipate the announcement that he needs or that he feels that he needs right before he gets on that plane to have that meeting. And it's a style of being a prime minister in which diplomacy matters a lot, and a lot of the internal pace of Canada is being adjusted to match what Mark Carney is doing on the international stage, and I think that's what's happening now. And so that's also why my guess would be that beyond what's good on paper with the South Korea versus the Germany proposal there, it's also about sending the signal that Canada and Europe is now forming a bloc, a form of a Western bloc against, although it's never going to be said as explicitly, but still against Donald Trump. And that there's been a lot of talk about how the EU and Canada together make up a form of GDP that is equal to that of the US. And that's the bloc that is being put forward now, a form of G6. And so that's what's happening now, and that's how I understand the announcement. And yes, the symbol of it, the politics of it, go beyond the actual realization of the plan. It's just the fact that Canada is sending signals on that route that this is the direction they're trying to go politically. And I'm going to be keeping an eye out for what Donald Trump may or may not say when he says how Canada's defense strategy is becoming more and more independent from the U.S. as well.
Yes, well, just for context for people at home, on the sub issue, Canada ruled out nuclear submarine options, and the U.S. doesn't make the conventional diesel and electric ones. So they were never part of this, but you're not wrong, Emily, on the diversification away from the Americans.